to the Insomnicat Show with Nicolette and Brian. We'll get real deep with you, educating, inspiring, and solving problems with some of the most inspirational humans on the planet. Buckle up and come on the journey.
I'm excited. All right, guys, I'm Nicolette, and today Brian and I are here with Susan Hannifin-MacNab. She is a social worker, and she is also going to talk to us today about something called A2Z Healing Toolbox. And we're going to talk through some grief stuff, some trauma stuff. Maybe, I hope I don't cry today. So please, Susan, I do that a lot. I do. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here with you guys.
All right, so kick us off. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey, and where social work fits into some of the other stuff that you're working on now?
Sure. So I was raised in San Diego, where I am right now, actually, and it's a warm 73 here in the middle of winter. Not to make you guys jealous.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to college. And what's that, Brian?
I said jealous already.
I know, sorry. But I went to college in Boston, so I got my fill of cold and studied education and went back to school for social work. And for 20 years, had been working with children, youth, and families all over the mainland US, in Hawaii, in Australia, and Canada. I married a man who was a professor of international business, which is why we were bopping around the world a bit. And he was a professor and an artist and a bagpiper, and he actually did this. I don't have wings on my head. He did that painting there. So kind of a jack of all trades guy. And our son was born in Australia as well, so dual citizen. Mm-hmm. And I just had, I had a really blessed and happy life. Marriage has its ups and downs, parenting has its ups and downs, traveling has its ups and downs, but really was having a good time in life. And then when I was 41, the three of us, husband, myself, and our 5-year-old son, moved back from Australia to San Diego to try to resettle back here on the mainland. And we were back for a month, and my husband went out for a drive and did not return. So we didn't know where he was or what had happened, but 2 weeks later, we got the knock on the door saying that he had been in a car accident. So there I was with my social worker self and my educator self with massive grief, horrendous trauma from that 2 weeks of missing in action, and a 5-year-old to raise on my own. We had just come back to San Diego, so I had no job, no car, no place to live. I mean, we were just in transition. So that was rock bottom, to put it mildly. And I had to start climbing out of the hole from there.
Susan, can I ask a personal question? Why did nobody know where he was for 2 weeks? I'm so curious.
Well, there are a lot of mountainous areas in many parts of the country, and in San Diego, just east of me, about 15 miles, are mountains. So he had gone over for a drive, and nobody knows what happened, but the vehicle he was driving went off one of the curves. And it's a really curvy area where accidents have happened before. But yeah, no, I mean, nobody knew because he was down in this ravine. And so not till a nature photographer was in that area taking photos of the beautiful area that it was with a lake and trees, did that nature photographer notice there's a vehicle down there. And so that's how that was discovered. But in the meantime, what do you do with those 2 weeks, or longer for many people, longer? Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Very sad.
Terrible. Oh gosh, I don't want to cry.
Sorry, not to make you cry.
I'm trying. Okay, so now here you are, you're pulling yourself out of the hole, and I'm assuming this is the motivation for your book, right? I mean, this is
exactly. So what I you know, so this is me 8 years later. My husband died 8 years ago. So I've come a long way with a lot of help from so many people and so many resources. But back then, the only thing that I knew how to do was try to make some sort of sense out of this horrendous situation. And I come from a military family. So things were often black or white, right or wrong, yes or no. And I'm a teacher also. So I think in a very linear fashion.
Right.
So although I didn't set out to gather resources in an A, B, C, D, E, F, G manner, what happened was I started social working my life and my child's life, because for 20 years I had helped other people gather resources, connect in the community, and that's all I knew how to do. So I reached out to everybody, everything, any group, any therapy for my son and I to try to help me understand this situation I was in. I was 41. Both my parents were alive. All of my grandparents lived till they were in their 80s or 90s. Really, I had no experience with grief or trauma or horrendous, profound loss like this. So I didn't know, I mean, I couldn't talk my way out of a paper bag. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to do something. And because I was raised in a military family, I knew internally that I don't know how I was going to figure it out, but I was going to. And I was going to keep going and going and going. And I didn't know what that meant. But that's how it started, just collecting resources. And then it went from there. I have that story for you too, if you want. Right. And for me, I didn't know what those things were, but I knew I had to go outside of myself, because time will heal all. No, that was not working for me. I couldn't sit and just expect that to heal, But so my grandfather was an admiral, and he was in World War II in a submarine. And I don't know if you've seen the movie. It's called U-571. It was out in the 90s. It's a great movie. John Bon Jovi, Matthew McConaughey, Harvey Keitel star in this movie about a German U-boat.
John Bon Jovi was in a movie?
Right?
Yes. He has super short hair, so you won't recognize him. I know. Yes, he was.
Sorry. It was perplexing.
I know, right? So actually the director of the movie, they flew my grandfather over to be the technical director, because he was actually in World War II. So there's a scene where Harvey Keitel, Matthew McConaughey, John Bon Jovi, they're in the sub and they're at the bottom of the Red Sea and they're getting depth charged, which basically means there are submarines, there are ships above them dropping bombs into the water, hoping to hit the sub, right? So in real time, that was my grandfather. In real life, at the bottom of the Red Sea, getting depth charged. And then my father was commanding and executive commanding aircraft carriers. My brother is at the Pentagon right now. He's a former F-18 pilot who's been in war. I mean, these are the kind of men that I grew up with. And then of course my mom was at home taking care of working full time and taking care of my brother and I. So I just grew up with people who just did it, whatever it was. And so for me, I just kept running after tools and resources that would help my son and I. One of the first things that I did was I reached out to the trainer at my gym, which is kind of a, people say coincidence, right? So one thing that always made sense to me was exercise, and I met Brent at a gym. So I had been at the gym during the time that Brent was missing, because when nothing else makes sense, you do what you know, right?
Mhm.
And I just happened to be working out in this small group class with a woman named Robin. And she just happened to tell me that she was widowed with 2 kids at home. She just happened to tell me that during this 2 weeks time. So as soon as I found out what happened to my husband, I called the trainer at the gym and I said, I need that woman's number.
Mhm.
I don't know anyone I don't know anyone who's been in this situation. So I need her. Like, I don't know what her last name is, but I need her. And so Robin and I to this day are wonderful friends. And she said to me, you know, you've got to come to this conference called Camp Widow. And I said, there is no way I'm going to hang out at a place called Camp Widow. But it was the greatest place I never wanted to be. And that led to me presenting at this conference all the tools I had gathered for myself and my son. And that was the very beginning of, here, I have a bunch of tools and resources for you, and let me share them.
And that is the birth of A2Z Healing Toolbox.
Well, you know, it is because I put together these, you can see all my teaching stuff is back here. And on the shelf, there is a skinny little binder that's got 26 pages in it. That was the original A2Z Healing Toolbox. I just printed out a copy for the 25 people who were in my.
It is A2Z.
That's right. That's right. So all the resources I'd been using, I put into a binder because I'm organized like that. And it became A is animals, B is breath work, C is counseling, D is doing your homework, all the way to letter Z, which is sleep. And how do you get sleep when you're grieving and traumatized? So I gave this information to the folks at Camp Widow in my workshop, and they said, where did you get this? And I said, well, these are just all the things that I've been using for my son and I. And they are the ones who said to me, you have got to put this in a book. And I said, you're out of your mind. That's completely not on my list of things to do. I never wanted to be an author. But 2 years later, the book came to be, and now it's not in a binder.
Much bigger than 26 pages.
I was about to say,
for someone who didn't want to be an author, you sure beat that thing up.
I know, right? It's pretty thick. Yeah. And
so
it's
tell
really
us a little bit about
the,
those tools, though. You know, you mentioned like some examples. So what's in it? You know, what I'm curious actually when you say animals, what what kind of research?
I want to know what X is.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm just saying.
X. You know, that's what X is.
I know
X-rays.
X is. I know that's a tricky one. X is examining your positives, which is kind of the buzzword gratitude, which I wanted nothing to do with for years. But there's actually quite a lot of research about the power of showing gratitude. So I didn't want to write a book and just say, here, go find all these things and that will help you. I wanted to give people resources and other individuals who had used these healing tools. So the book, the first chapter of the book is, what is grief? What is it? What are the common grief reactions in adults? And there's a list. Socially, how does it alter you? Physically, how can it alter you? Spiritually, emotionally, what does that look like and feel like? And there's a chart in there so people can actually, it's meant to be a workbook, get your pencil out or your pen out and circle things. And then the next chapter is trauma. What is trauma? And a chart, what are some common trauma reactions? Because there are many people who, we say grief, and I miss somebody, they're not here anymore physically. But a lot of folks have trauma embedded with grief, profound loss, sudden loss, suicide loss. There are a lot of people that have trauma embedded with grief. So I wanted to make sure I touched on both of those. And then the next 26 chapters are written the same, and it's simple because people in grief and trauma situations Yeah, I mean, our brain is fuzzy. We can't concentrate well. So it's really 2 pages of my own, how did I utilize this tool? You know, animals. I have a therapy dog and I have fish all around the house. I didn't have any of those things before Brent died, but there's a lot of research on the physiological changes that happen when humans interact and put themselves near animals. So part of each chapter is the why. Why do animals help grief and trauma? Well, they lower our depression, they lower our anxiety, they increase our happy hormones, you know, oxytocin and dopamine go up, and those are all helpful in healing to a brain that is just a mess, really.
Do people often confuse grief and trauma? Like, do they confuse one for the other?
You know, I think right now, since we're in this time of a pandemic, those words are kind of thrown around sometimes a lot, especially the word trauma, like, oh, that was traumatizing. Oh, that was a traumatic date. Oh, that was, you know, but the reality is there are very specific markers for grief. Not that my reaction would be the same as yours, Brian, or Nicolette's would be different as well, because that can be all over. But I think there is some misinformation about what those two things actually are and how long they last. Because, you know, in our culture, you get 365 days to mourn the loss of your person, and then you should be done. No, that is not how it works. But that is what we think in our culture. And then you maybe get 2 weeks off of work to grieve that loss. Grief and trauma are, you constantly heal and change and grow with that experience. You can't just leave it behind and throw it in a box.
In 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Or even
For 2 months
365
or 2
days.
years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
I remember, and I don't know who wrote this. You may know, but I remember because, you know, I lost my dad when I was relatively young, and I remember reading this thing where they said like sort of sadness is like being in the ocean, and the waves, you know, over time get further and further apart. So at first it feels like you're drowning, and then they get further apart, but you never lose that grief. You know, you always have that feeling. I don't think, I mean, it's been 20 something years, you know?
Yes. Yes. And I love that, the ocean analogy, because I'm in San Diego and I spend a lot of time in the water. But my friend Robin is the first widowed person I knew well, said that same thing to me, that I said, how am I going to do this? How am I going to survive this? And she said, you will, and I'll be next to you while you're doing it, which is a whole other story about peer mentors and the importance of that. But she said, you know, it won't go away, but it will change over time. And you will learn to live with it, and it won't beat you down as much, you know, every day. So it changes, but Brent's always going to be a part of my life. I mean, his things are hanging around the house, his surfboard's just down there. He's the father of my child. So we talk about dad all the time. And I think that's healthy.
So you mentioned peer mentoring. I mean, that was obviously important. Now, the reason I want to bring that up also is because, and I mentioned this earlier, we spoke with someone yesterday who was talking about, you know, the resources available for veterans coming home, you know, after, you know, their time is over. And they come home and they feel like, a lot of them, what we've learned is that they don't feel like they have the resources that they need to kind of go back into the world, right? You know what I mean? So
yes.
Do you feel that maybe those resources aren't available to people who are grieving as readily as they should be, or people don't know where to look for them? Like, look, you hunted down a woman at a gym, right? Because you didn't really even know where to start with this.
Right. Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think our culture and our society does a great disservice to all of us by not having these conversations about, hey, you know, there's life and there's all the living, and then we will all die. I mean, that is inevitable. And so, you know, we have baby showers and there's the excitement of all that. And we mark all of these things, weddings and graduations and all. And then at the end, you know, it's some awful dramatic deal that nobody wants to talk about. I mean, so I think that has been a disservice to all of us. However, maybe because we're in this time of pandemic, people are more open to talking about grief and death and trauma. There are a lot of resources now online. There are Facebook pages for bereaved parents. There are foundations, there are nonprofits. And I can tell you about the nonprofit I work for as well. But I think once you're in the situation, if you were to go out and look, you could find things, but you'd have to figure out, well, which ones work for you, which ones don't, and rely on peers in the same community to help you figure that out.
Right.
So
So
would you say
it's
a
not
good-
like so I was gonna say, it's not like there's like one good source where you go like, here, this may work for me based on who I am, or almost like, you know, like helping the person profile themselves and go, okay, maybe you should check these resources or those resources, like this, you know, based on their
Right.
interest. Like some people, like you mentioned, exercise, right? For me, that's a great time to sort of heal and get in touch with myself, you know. And some people, they need physical activity to get through certain things, you know, and everyone's very different, you know, and it doesn't seem like there's a good resource that goes, okay, based on this, who you are, you know, you have to go compile it, you know, by yourself. That's
Yes.
tough, right?
Well, I mean, to your point, Brian, so this came to be because I said, this situation is hellacious. And if I can make, you know, as a social worker who cares for other people, if I can make anyone's life even a smidge easier, I want to compile these 26 ways people can start, take a single small step, whether it's, you know, letter S is slide into exercise, letter B is breath work, you know, if you're a yogi, I mean, like pick a place and start. And and that's what the book is all about. It's here are places to start. Just open it to a chapter that works for you or that somehow speaks to you. If you're an exerciser, okay, well, and then each chapter has resources for exercise, for breath work. So you're not left thinking, well, where do I go now? Because there's a whole list of places you can go.
I think everyone should go out and adopt a dog. I'm just saying.
I think there have been a lot of
weekend.
adoptions, yeah.
He's biased.
But
A bias. Yeah.
dogs are
Yeah, I do
great.
a lot of
Dogs are
rescues.
great.
I just got another rescue. So
You know, I mean, animals are wonderful, but I do have to say that I was so incapacitated after Brent died. I could barely take care of me.
Right.
And then add a 5-year-old, absolutely no way I could add an animal, except I could add fish. So I started getting I have my beta fish right here. I have beta fish in every room of the house. Can you see that little guy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And even just staring meditatively at a fish tank or a fishbowl helps decrease anxiety. Well, I got to put this over here so he doesn't fall. So I could do the fish, right? But it took me 2 years in order to get a dog because it took me that long to just feel like I could handle that.
Right.
yeah. So now you just mentioned meditation, right? Because I'm a big proponent of meditation. So where does meditation lie in all this?
Letter M in the book. I have to say,
Chapter 13.
oh, it's right. I know. I was not a meditator prior to Brent dying. And I have to say, that's not something that I immediately gravitated toward, the traditional sit in a room and that type of meditation.
Yeah, me either.
But I learned, so I learned, I mean, there's walking meditation. I swim a lot. That is very meditative. You know, it's just the water, it's just you.
Mhm.
And it kind of takes you to, right, a more calm place. So I always say to people, meditation is not just that one traditional style we think about, right? Sitting cross-legged in a yoga room. It can be done differently in a pool, on a walk. Yeah, but it's important though, because there's so much research back to that on the power of calming the mind, which is why mindfulness and meditation are such hot topics to talk about right now.
Mm. Well, you also mentioned your nonprofit. You're doing a lot of things, Susan. So where does that fit into?
Right.
Where does that fit into the organization that you're working at now?
Right. So I mentioned earlier Camp Widow, which was the conference, the greatest place I never wanted to be. And that conference called Camp Widow is run by an organization called Soaring Spirits International. So now this is right 8 years after Brent died. Now I'm the programs and education manager for Soaring Spirits International, which is a global nonprofit organization that serves the widowed community with peer support. So we offer programs to anyone of any age, any sexual orientation. If you have suffered the death of your life partner, your fiance, your girlfriend, whoever you thought you were going to spend the rest of your life with, you are considered in our eyes widowed, and we have a place and a space for you. So we've got pre-COVID, we had 3 in-person conferences every year called Camp Widow. 300 to 400 widowed people converge on a Marriott hotel in San Diego, Toronto, and Tampa. Now we've switched to virtual conferences. So we had 2 Camp Widow virtuals in 2020. We also have 75 regional groups across Canada, the US, and Ireland. And these are now virtual groups that people can join from wherever they are with other widowed people. And it's peer support. So finding other people who have been through a similar situation, same end story, right? Maybe you got there in a different way, but same end story. And peer mentoring and group support is huge. So we do a lot of programming for widowed people. I mean, millions of widowed people have found Soaring Spirits International, and it's an amazing place.
Awesome, Susan. That's such, I love when people put information into the hands of people that need it, you know.
Yeah, especially
and I,
tools and resources, right?
yeah,
And
that seems to be the theme of the week. Right?
Yeah, and to-dos, right? The to-dos, like the actual, not just like, hey, you should meditate. Well, here's some ways you could do it, right? Or here's, that is a big thing.
Exactly. And also, so I work with a lot of bereaved parents as well, and there are resources for them in the book. Really any type of grief or trauma, those resources are in the book. There's just, there's so much going on. I know you guys have different arms of what you're doing. And so there are different arms of what I do with my A2Z Healing Toolbox workshops, and then things I do with Soaring Spirits International. But it's really, the umbrella is helping people heal grief and trauma and move with it and learn how to live with it and thrive, not just survive. And I think the beginning stages for anyone is survival, but thriving is another step. And I like to see people get, that direction too.
So Susan, why don't you leave us with this? What would you say you've learned over these past 8 years about grief? Maybe there are some misconceptions, and I know we use that analogy of the ocean, which I really like. Thank you, Brian, because it really helps me to understand. I think you've told me that once before, but hearing it again, it felt new. But what would you say that you've really learned over this process?
Oh gosh, So many things. First off, people want to help. They just don't know what to do. So when someone dies, a friend, a family member, many people want to help, but they have no idea what to do. And so I say to everyone, just show up and keep showing up. I mean, this is 8 years later for me. I'm still raising my son solo. I haven't repartnered or remarried. Someday I hope to be in that place, but I'm still raising this child solo, working full time. I still need help. So it doesn't go away. So just keep showing up for people. Cut their grass, shuffle their kids, make them a dinner. I mean, years later, right? Because this doesn't go away. So that's one thing I learned, that people do want to help. They just don't know what to do. I've also learned about the power of peer support, whether that's other widowed people for widowed people, other bereaved parents for bereaved parents, other people that have suffered a suicide in the family. Surrounding yourself with other people who get it is so powerful and important, and helps your own healing, because okay, if they're doing this, then I'm going to do this. I may not have all the answers and how I'm going to do this, but surrounding yourself with others who get it is very important. And lastly, I would say there's grief doesn't look, and trauma doesn't look the same for everyone. So where I was very emotive and expressive and screaming and yelling in my closet and cursing in the car and pounding pillows on my bed, I have other friends who couldn't cry and they couldn't emote. And there are differences between men and women and how men and women grieve as well. So it doesn't look the same, and everybody's on their own boat in the water, right? And so we can wave at other people in their boats, but maybe our boats look different, and that's okay. That's okay.
Thank you so much, Susan, for sharing the story with us and for doing the work that you're doing. It's really good stuff.
Creating resources for
people. For the resources. On that note, why don't you let us know where we can find your book and where we can learn more about you and A2Z Healing Toolbox.
Okay, so my website is called A2Z Healing Toolbox.com, and people can buy the book there. It's also on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, pretty much anywhere you can get it. And I'm on Facebook as well. Not so good with Instagram, but I'm around. And I also do some collaborative work with a virtual mental health platform called Circles. It's circlesup.com. And I teach my A2Z Healing Toolbox class on the circlesup.com platform. So if folks want to come take a class, they can find me there as well.
That's awesome. And we'll put all those links in the description, everybody, so you'll be able to access them easily. Thank you again, Susan. We appreciate it.
Thanks, you guys. Good to be here.